Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable podcast, coming to you live from Brisbane, Australia. It is Sunday, the 16th of November, final special episode of the Australian Roundtable, covering the Brisbane G20, which concluded earlier this evening. Now, if you're new to the show, this is a roundtable discussion podcast covering Australia and international affairs, and we normally broadcast from 4 p.m. Brisbane here every Sunday, and each episode runs for about 90 minutes. All of the views expressed are of the particular person speaking them. We all speak for ourselves. We come together on a Sunday to discuss these events. I'm your host, Johnno, and I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And once again, it is our tremendous privilege to be joined by Australia's fittest man in the over 55 category, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the compliment.
That's all right. Now, I should point out that in our weekly broadcast, we try to be relatively structured. And if you go back through our back catalogue, there's always timestamps for each individual topic. Of course, we've been out in the field all weekend. And so tonight will be more of a general discussion off the cuff, a lot less structured. But in saying that, we do have a few topics we want to cover tonight. In the review, we want to go over climate change and how Murdoch newspapers have turned on Abbott and how clearly that's going to be one of the biggest things to come out of the G20 is the climate change agenda. We're going to talk about the communique that was released and one particular part of it to do with women in the workforce. We're going to talk about the flag burning incident that took place in the city today and the news coverage of that. And we'll also try and discuss the whole Putin versus the world narrative that's dominating Australian media and also international media from what I can tell. And depending on how much time, we'll also go over a few other things. But I should say that regarding the G20 and the previous two special episodes that we've done on the Friday and the Saturday, on the Friday, we discussed how the Vlad laws here in Queensland were passed just before any protests were going to kick off. We discussed the People's Summit in the lead up to G20. We discussed how polite the police had been from everything that we'd seen leading up to G20. And of course, British Prime Minister David Cameron's speech to the Australian Parliament. Then in the Saturday episode, we discussed the rally in the CBD, the biggest rally of the whole protests to G20, the march through the city, Barack Obama's speech at the University of Queensland and the motorcade leading to that and also after that, and also just the protest movement in general. So because we discussed those things on Friday and Saturday, we're not going to do a comprehensive review of G20 tonight. Tonight's just more of a wrap-up of the Sunday and concluding thoughts on G20, and then by next week we'll get back to our regular schedule where we discuss more select events. This is really just a wrap-up of G20 after what's been a very long weekend.
And so very hot weekend.
A very hot and a very long weekend, and I'm sure some of our regular listeners can already tell we're sounding a little bit more jaded than we normally do, but we'll try and be as perky as we can for the next hour or so. Now, before we get into those items that I mentioned on the agenda, I'll throw straight to you, Ethan, and your general thoughts now that G20 is effectively concluded.
Well, one thing is I'm pretty relieved in terms of my health and my fatigue. For 4 days in a row out in the city all day in the heat and then editing all night, it really took its toll on me. And I had a bit of a sleep in this morning as the Sunday wasn't really as busy as the rest. There were still things happening that you went out in the field, Johnno, but G20's over. And as I said last night, I'm still really shocked and surprised and still using it as a learning experience where I try to piece together some of the things that I've thought based on what has happened, based on how everything went all right, and my thoughts on how it was a disappointment at the same time. So, as I said, it will go down in history as one of the most unique G20s that's ever been held.
Yeah. No, I agree with pretty much all you've said there. I'm relieved that it's over, mainly for fatigue reasons as well. You just get tired, and I haven't been up all night like you, Ethan. No, truly. If you go and do photographs and videos all day and then you've got to edit them all night, and it's hard work, and it drops your level too when you're not getting the right amount of sleep. So anyway, I'm quite pleased that it's over.
Yeah, and for the viewers who are tuning in tonight but haven't had a chance to check out last night's episode or the episode before, I mean, basically, Ethan, touching on what you said, a lot of what we expected would happen did, but a lot of what we expected would happen didn't happen. And in many ways, this G20, it certainly didn't go how I expected it would go in terms of the protest and the impact that they might have had, the message that the protests were getting out, who was leading the protests, the police response. I mean, really, I'm happy to admit here, my predictions for the most part were way off the mark. I mean, the protests were smaller. They had a far less structured message. The most important thing weren't protested. I mean, just to recap on yesterday, basically the two main messages of the protests were to do with Indigenous Australian issues and climate change. So many other issues that ought to have been protested at G20 weren't mentioned by anyone. We didn't see any placards to do with it. The protests themselves were very orderly, which I would have expected. I didn't think there were going to be any anarchists or anyone doing anything damaging, but the protests were very orderly. They proceeded as normal. Of course, we have had the heat problem here. I mean, Brisbane's a subtropical climate, so it can be warm in November at the best of times, but we've had an almost unseasonal heat wave, which would have dented the spirits of a lot of protesters and the police. And for the most part, I mean, if I could try and summarize it quickly, the protest essentially fizzled. I mean, we've had a bit of a fizzle of a G20 response. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely would. And it did surprise me. I didn't know what to expect to begin with, but when I look back on it, yes, it didn't. It virtually just came down to an Aboriginal protest. That's about what it amounted to.
Yeah, and I'll get. I want to touch on the flag burning today because that ties into that. So we'll get to that later on. But yeah, I mean, if we can just sort of summarize it, the G20 was a lot less. I don't want to say dramatic, but there was a lot less to it than we were expecting.
Yep, I agree. I'm happy to say on air that pretty much everything that I either predicted, which, you know, any person that had looked at previous G20s, had looked in the environment in Australia, you know, it'd be safe to assume that these things were going to happen. The relationship between Canada and Australia and how things are, you know, similarly turning out between our two countries. But I'm happy to admit on air that it went completely the opposite of what I expected, or even, you know, thought would have been just the general default level of how it would have commenced. You know, the police did a brilliant job. You know, the protests, that everyone was arrested justifiably. You know, it was just completely, and the heat was just unbearable. You know, it was just so unique. It was just such a crazy weekend in that respect. You know, just not what I expected.
Yeah, actually, I felt quite sorry for the police today, because it was getting close to 40 at least in there. It might have been higher in the Brisbane areas.
Yeah, it was hotter today.
And they had all that protective clothing on. They must have been baking.
Yeah. No, it was hotter today. We watched the news and they said that today was breaking records all around the country, all around the state in terms of, you know, heat that they haven't had in 60 or so years. So the poor police in those gears, you know.
And we did give due credit to the police on Friday's episode, and we said that on an individual level, I mean, I was searched. I think for the weekend, they came and took my details and searched my bag 6 or 7 times all up, which is ridiculously excessive, and the number of police was excessive, but that's from higher above. At the ground level, the police themselves were incredibly well behaved. I probably spoke with, I don't know, half a dozen, you know, one-on-one personally, either through bag searches or just chatting as I walked around. Every one of them was very polite. And then when they were doing the bag searches, for the most part, they were very respectful, not standoverish at all. On the ground level, the police were terrific. I'll say that right now. They were terrific. Of course, that doesn't take away from the fact that there were thousands of them, far too many. It was a police state while they were here. And we discussed all of that last night, sort of the distinction between the way the police behaved on the ground level, which was fantastic. And let's not lose sight of the fact, let's not lose the forest for the trees here. There is still a big forest here, and that is the police state, which they brought in with very little opposition from the people. And then even at G20 itself, there was very little talk about that because the focus was on on climate change and Indigenous issues.
I was gonna reiterate that again, just because the police, that was just a reflection of themselves on a level. It doesn't excuse the fact that a police state was in play and that all of these draconian laws, including strip searches and everything, could have been exploited if the police wanted to. So it doesn't excuse it. It was still a nightmare police state situation. It was just that the individuals involved didn't act on that for a number of reasons, but that still doesn't excuse it.
And the state politicians are still saying that the Vlad laws, I think we explained that last night, the banning of group meetings with nominated people, those laws are still in place, or they claim they are anyway. Yeah, and I think it was the Supreme Court, there's a High Court that's supposed to have validated them, which we can talk about that later, which is sort of a bit dubious anyway. But they're claiming that yes, we've got the go ahead now. We can just introduce these laws to ban people three or more grouping.
Yeah, and I read an article this morning saying that Campbell Newman was taking the opportunity to try and talk to some of these leaders at the G20 Summit before they left to speak to them about introducing similar legislation in their countries to say, look how good it's worked for us. Look how well the G20 went. And, you know, if some of the measures that we took during this G20, the police state, the draconian laws, they worked. So now you should do that.
Yeah, and that is, for me, the overarching theme. I've spent more time thinking about this because obviously people, look, I'm going to speak for myself here. We were concerned that they might be over the top aggressive like they were in Toronto. They've gone the complete other way. But then you take a step back and realize this still plays right into their hands because now, look, even us sitting here, some of the more cynical people in this city, at least, we're saying, actually, the police on the ground level were very well behaved. And so it's now so easy for them to say, well, look, we can have a police state and everything's fine.
Yeah.
In fact, everything's better than fine. Look how safe everything was, which makes people more accepting of the police state. But of course, once the police state is in, there's no guarantee that it's always used benevolently. So in fact, I'm going to sit here right now and say, kudos to the people at the top of this. They have played, the people at the top organizing this, they've played it fantastically well. And not many people are going to realize that what they've done. They've got a longer vision here than just this weekend.
It's complete. It ended up, in all senses, being worse than if chaos and mayhem broke out, because now they can say, as Johnno just explained, look how it worked and look how everything was fine and how people can accept it. So, even though there was no violence on a higher level, when you look at the bigger picture, it played out even better than if there was. That's concerning. Yeah.
You have to say touche. They've played this one well. And once we've had a bit of time to get some proper sleep and get some proper nutrients into us and come back next Sunday, I think we can probably go into more detail about, the bigger vision here of what's really happened. This has been a significant weekend, just looking at it from the police state side, without even getting into the nitty gritty of what happened behind closed doors and the deals that were made. Speaking of which, we might as well move into that now. Now, I wanted to talk about how climate change, despite the fact that it wasn't supposed to be on the agenda for G20, because of course the Prime Minister of this country, Tony Abbott, got into Parliament largely on a campaign to end the carbon tax that we had. So he had to sort of distance himself from the idea of climate change. So he didn't want it on the agenda of the G20. Despite that, there has been how do I articulate myself here? It has become the biggest issue, despite the fact it wasn't even on the agenda.
Yeah, that's right.
And I want to read out a section from Sky News, which is one of the news agencies here in Australia. This is a quote from an article that I saw on their website just recently. Quote, G20 nations have backed strong action on climate change in the wake of the Brisbane Leaders Summit. We support strong and effective action to address climate change, the official communique released on Sunday said. Climate change wasn't on the formal agenda prepared by the Australian presidency, but supportive statements by US President Barack Obama this weekend ensured its inclusion in the final statement. The leaders agreed their future actions will support sustainable development, economic growth, and certainty for business and investment. The G20 will work together to adopt a protocol under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to present at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015. End quote. So, they explained it much better than I could. It wasn't on the agenda, but look, it's still the big takeaway thing from the G20. And let me make that even more clear by going over the Courier Mail again. The Courier Mail is the only daily newspaper in the city of Brisbane. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. The front page is a full colour spread of Barack Obama giving his speech at UQ. The headline is Wham Bam. Subtitle, Obama hails stunning Queensland shirt fronts PM on climate change. US President Barack Obama celebrated perfect Queensland, then slapped down Tony Abbott for not doing enough to fight climate change. So that's from the front page. Turn to page 2. The headline is Obama's Great Barrier Belief. Of course, that's a play on words because of Queensland's barrier reef and how we suggested that if we don't act on climate change, we will lose the barrier reef. First paragraph from that article, the leader of the most powerful nation in the world used his keynote speech in Brisbane yesterday to deliver a stinging rebuke to Tony Abbott for not doing enough to fight climate change. Look to page 3. Headline, Fire was friendly but real. This is the first paragraph. 2 speeches made a few kilometres apart yesterday laid bare the gulf between the global vision of a transformative US president and the prosaic housekeeping obsessions of an Australian leader struggling with his to-do list, while Tony Abbott opened the G20 by running off his election pledges. Get rid of the carbon tax, stop the boats, build roads, get the budget under control. Barack Obama pleaded for universal democratic principles, equality for gay and lesbian people, the advancement of women, which I'll get to later, and facing up to climate change. So there you go. Pages 1, 2, and 3 all saying Obama is greater than Abbott and Obama's fighting for climate change. Now, people listening at home who aren't from Brisbane or aren't from Australia, who don't follow Australian politics might be saying, well, is this really such a surprise? Yes, because Abbott got into power in this country largely backed by a massive push from News Corp to support him on his agenda of destroying the carbon tax.
Yeah, that's
you see? So that, and they spent more than a year, News Limited newspapers all across Australia, a concerted campaign to destroy the Labor government at the time, which, by the way, I despise the Labor government. I despise any government. They're all corrupt. They're all terrible. I don't like any of them. But it's an objective. I mean, okay, it's subjective, but not many objective people disagree that News Limited were engaged in destroying the Labor Party by campaigning against their carbon tax, because that's what Abbott was doing. And in the space of a few days, Rupert Murdoch's News Limited has done a complete about-face and now are attacking Abbott using Obama's speech and Obama's messages as their justification for doing so. Boys, what do you think?
Well, you were just talking about the Sky News you were quoting before.
Yeah, and of course, you know who Sky News is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Is it ongoing? Yeah. Well, that's so it is. It's a concerted campaign then.
Yeah. Well, the same concerted campaign that was used to help destroy Labor and push the Liberal Party policy of no carbon tax, climate change isn't real, whatever. The same companies, Murdoch's companies, are now doing the exact same thing to Abbott, but for the opposite purpose. Now they want climate change action. I mean,
you can't make this up,
You
John.
can't make this stuff up. And I did kind of forecast this, but even I couldn't have predicted pages 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Every single one doing the same thing.
Yeah. No, I think it just demonstrates the power of the media that they have, because it's no secret that Tony Abbott got into power due to the Murdoch press. No one can deny that. The Murdoch press absolutely destroyed the current government at the time, absolutely destroyed through the papers. Murdoch got Tony Abbott in power. It resonated in the subconscious of the people that Tony Abbott was better. You know, every time they were demonizing, Gillard and Rudd, and as it continued on, it was every single article was a calculated attempt to destroy them, to get Abbott in. And now they've done a complete 180 and they're doing it, to destroy Abbott now. And you've got to ask the reason why. And there's always going to be a reason behind it, because the media are really the decision makers. And there was someone at the forum who disagreed with me during the People's Summit, saying that the media doesn't hold this influence. I've written articles on how they hold the influence. They hold some of the most majority of the influence, So it's just, you've just got to ask why, because everything, pages 1, 2, and 3, all of this, pushing climate change, demonizing Abbott now, everything has an agenda.
Well, part of the whole system, it's been going on for a long time. I remember reading books ages ago about the Civil War in America, and that's when they started taking over the news media back then. And it's been going on, well, that's what, a couple of 100 years now. But the best thing they do is to deny that that's the case. No, we don't own all the television networks. We don't own Hollywood. We don't own the newspapers. Yeah,
it's illusion of choice. People think when they're watching the TV that they switch between channels news, that it's different, that they've actually got choice. Or I prefer Channel 7 over Channel 9. No, they're the same thing. They essentially read from the same script. If you actually pay attention to this, they practically run the same rundown every time. Just as it is in politics, it's all an illusion, people. It's an illusion.
Yeah, and people, foreign listeners who don't listen to our show might be saying, well, that's just Murdoch. Surely the other people in the press are different. Well, remember, something like 65 to 70% of newspapers sold in Australia on any given day are Murdoch newspapers. Of the remaining media market share, most of that is Fairfax, who print their own tabloids in Sydney and Melbourne. Because again, Brisbane's our third biggest city, only has the one newspaper. The two cities that have two newspapers, the other newspaper is Fairfax. Who's the largest shareholder, single shareholder of Fairfax? Well, it's Gina Reinhart, who is a billionaire mining magnate. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
So 70%, 65 to 70% is Murdoch. Anyone who tries to even suggest that doesn't give him incredible power over the opinions of people, well, that person just can't think. I mean, there's no point even talking to that person about any topic. Forget about it.
But even the free newspapers, I don't know what you call them, local rag or whatever you like to call them, in Brisbane, they're all owned by Murdoch as well. He's gone around and picked all those up as well.
Yeah.
So he's virtually got complete coverage of everything.
Yeah, my understanding, like 65 to 70% on the top level, but Murdoch's influence is through a lot more newspapers than that. For example, Quest Community News, which is all throughout Queensland, Quest Community News, when their printers stopped working, the Fairfax Media Company printed their papers for a month in cahoots with them. You know what I mean? So this influence and this, you know, partnership just between, you know, just Fairfax and the Murdoch media, which are, you know, the two largest, you know, that's something like 90%, 95%.
They're just good friends. They're just good friends.
Yeah, they're just good friends. You know, when they were printing all of Fairfax's media.
No, they're just trying to help their mates out. Absolutely.
No, it's unbelievable.
Now, to try and make sense of this, so basically Murdoch newspapers run against climate change action. They run against the carbon tax and the Labor Party who instituted it. Then Abbott gets into power and we don't hear too much about all of it for a little while. Now Obama's in town. Look, Obama's pushing climate change action. All of a sudden, News Corp are all for climate change action, but it's going to be a different type of climate change action. Instead of a direct tax, I suspect they're going to go down the route of carbon trade emissions, because of course, if I'm a company and I have excess carbon trade permits, call them whatever you want, and I sell them, there's a middleman in between who takes care of it, isn't there? And even if you're only taking a 1% cut on every trade, we're talking billions of dollars on something that's been created of thin air, essentially. I mean, we actually are talking about trading thin air. We're talking about trading carbon dioxide.
Madness.
So there are many vested interests who've wanted this for a long time. And I know that, Lindsay, you've got in front of you an article from Matt Taibbi who discusses some of this.
Yeah. This is from 2009, and he did. It was about Goldman Sachs, and he did a rundown on all their bubbles: housing bubble, oil bubbles. It went through the whole lot, and how they were selling securities that they were betting against themselves, and all. You know, it was a scandalous behaviour, and it was a really good article. But anyway, just when you get towards the end of it, he went on to global warming, because of he was making it quite clear. I can read a little bit of it if you like.
Yeah, please.
He was making it quite clear that this is not. They don't have to go into any intrigue to make money out of this. It's just there for them. The government determines how much the coal will be, and they make money on it. So I'll just have there's 2 pages. I don't want to read the whole lot to you, but I'll just give you a little bit, and perhaps we could put it up on the
absolutely
on the thing. Okay. So then he says, well, fast forward to today. It's early June in Washington, D.C. Barack Obama, I've heard that name before. Wasn't that the bloke that was, anyway. a popular young politician whose leading private campaign donor was an investment bank called Goldman Sachs. Well, there we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Its employees paid some $981,000 to his campaign, and sits in the White House having seamlessly navigated the political minefield of the bailout era. Goldman is once again back to its old business, scouting out loopholes in a new government-created market with the aid of a set of alumni occupying key government jobs. Gone are Hank Paulson and Neil Kashkari. In their place are Treasury Chiefs of Staff Mark Peterson, CFTC Chief Gary Gensler, both former Goldmanites. Gensler was the firm's co-head of finance. And instead of credit derivatives or oil futures or mortgage-backed CDOs, the new game in town, the next bubble, is carbon credits, a booming trillion-dollar market that barely even exists yet, but will be if the Democratic Party that it gave $4,452,585 to in the last election manages to push into existence a groundbreaking new commodity bubble disguised as an environmental plan called cap and trade. The new carbon credit market is a virtual repeat of the commodities market casino that's been kind to Goldman, except it has one delicious new wrinkle. If the plan goes forward as expected, the rise in prices will be government mandated. So our mate Barrick will be able to determine what the prices are, and Goldman Sachs will be, it's almost like spinning a casino wheel, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, I've got distracted. Goldman won't even have to rig the game. Hence, anyway, I won't go on anymore, but you get the message. And that pretty much says it all. I've got to be careful calling him a crook and things like that, but it does sound like it.
Yeah, and of course this article was from the Rolling Stone back in 2009.
Yeah.
So shortly after Barack Obama was elected, of course he was elected in 2008. And I mean, this has been forewarned for a little while, that there are people with lots of money to be made by inventing these things called carbon credits. Call them whatever you want, carbon credits. And when people are trading carbon credits on carbon emissions or global warming, which we can get to in a moment, but we'll put that to the side. Regardless of whether it's effective or not, someone's making a lot of money. Now, I said billions. Tayabi's article says trillions. There's a lot of money in this. And the point that you just made with this article is those same people who stand to make a lot of money, what do you know, go back to Obama's election, and they were the ones largely bankrolling his presidential campaign. Ethan, what do you think of this?
It's unbelievable, isn't it? And now we've got on the front of the Courier Mail, Obama, not so young anymore, not such a young, but is still, still influenced by the same corporate interests, still trying to push this agenda. And it's just, people need to recognize this. It's right in front of your face when you want to research into it. And you can see how it's resonated to the people when we speak about the people at the rally, when we see all of this, how climate change, which, global warming, then they had to change it to climate change, you know what I mean? Whatever term that they had to use to try and, picture it in a real light or in an existent light that, so people could get behind. You can see how it's resonated to the people and how this manipulation has unfolded, just like a pyramid scheme from the top all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah, you have a lot more to do with these younger people than me. How would you get that through to them? Would they be accepting of that? If you gave them that information that was from an article that was written in 2009, would they even consider that as being reasonable or not? Because the ones I saw the other day seemed to be just totally, what's the word?
Entranced.
Entranced. Yeah.
And when you say the ones that you saw, of course, yesterday we discussed how Barack Obama's speech at the University of Queensland here, where there were many young people in the audience, his speech was a 40-minute speech, and for the second 10-minute period, it was very flat. But then when he got to the topic of climate change, all of a sudden everyone picked up, yay, Obama! Like they actually cheered. Like they actually cheered when he got onto the topic of addressing climate change. And if I can answer the question you just directed to Ethan, the indoctrination is so strong now that for you, to even question climate change now is heretical. Okay, and for at least for a while there. For all of their flaws and for the fact that they were doing it for their own political agenda, at least the largest newspaper distributor here was not as pro climate change as many outlets might be. But now that they've turned, now that News Corp has turned, that's it now. There's no more mainstream resistance.
Okay. So I've got to be careful then, because I could get burnt at the stake or any damn thing.
It's so hard. No, these people are in a complete trance. They're in a complete trance. Climate change has become it's related into all these bogus environmental issues as well, and also into economic as well. And it's gone to all these different issues with all these activists who may have been excluded to one issue. It's now spread into multiple issues, supposedly, and then all of those people are now entranced that are in that. So it's just a mass. And now with the media on the side, it's just going to snowball.
It is a worry to me, because when I read that, I mean, that's just like following like the trail. They gave you the money, so therefore they're going to want something back. Nothing's free. So obviously they've got to have a bit of influence on him. But other people don't seem to be able to see that. Cause and effect.
And look, here's the thing. I finished high school and went to university around the time, first went to university around the time of Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And I'm happy to admit here, I'll admit, hand on heart, I believed all of this climate change alarmism. I did. And of course, in 2007, Kevin Rudd assumed the Labor leadership. John Howard had been in power for more than a decade. We all hated Howard because he was a warmonger and because he used race people. Of course, I still hate anyone who does that, but a lot of people who hated John Howard for doing it are forgiving of the left because they find into this false right-left paradigm.
Yeah, that's right.
So I had every right to hate Howard, but I bought into this idea, well, if you hate the guy who's in, maybe the guy who's not in is going to be better. And of course, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth comes out, it goes viral, you know what I mean? Everyone buys into this idea. Kevin Rudd offers this, we're going to act on climate change. And I did believe this, okay, I did. So if even someone like me, and this was back in 2007, was buying into the climate change alarmism, and this was before it had really taken over schools, I can only imagine how strong the indoctrination is in schools today. And part of me wants to go and investigate this and see if I can find out what's in the curriculum of a high school. as an investigative journalist or just a citizen who's concerned about what we're teaching the kids, but feeling that what will be being taught in the schools.
It's in most social science departments.
Yeah.
The curriculum they have to learn about, and they have to watch Al Gore's speeches and everything too. It happens. Even to last year. Last year was the latest that I'd seen of the curriculum in Queensland. I don't know about the rest of the state, but I assume obviously it will be. You had to write papers on it. Just as now they have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where Israel, poor Israel are being attacked by these ruthless Palestinians. They actually have a curriculum now on the 9/11 and the war on terror, the decade after, speaking about bin Laden and the boogeyman, and how now it's an ideology where terrorism's around every corner. It's just the indoctrination is so prevalent now, and that's a main factor.
And essentially, like what I'm going to now from now on call after last night, the Obama youth. The Obama youth have been waiting, and now after 6 years and after his final midterm elections, now Obama's got 2 years to institute what he was put there to institute. One of the many things he was put there to institute all these years ago. We're going to get in climate change action. We're going to get in carbon permits or whatever. And of course, the only way that they, in theory, work, of course, they're not going to do anything, but let's pretend that they could. The only way they could work is if nations sign up. And of course, the only way that those nations could sign up in that work is to have global governance, a centralized organization who are in charge of issuing the permits, monitoring the permits, et cetera, and that's just one more step towards one world government. So you only have to take one step back to see exactly what's happening here. And of all the significant things to happen here at G20 in Brisbane, this could very well be the biggest one. Climate change is now, even when the Prime Minister of the host nation says, I don't want to talk about this, still
they came in over the top of it.
They come in over the top. News Corp comes in over the top, and this is still not issue number one. And this is the beginning of the end of opposition to climate change. I would say
it's ironic how, as these leaders come in and no, we want climate change to be on the agenda. It's ironic how then all of a sudden the media comes in over the top and then says, let's make it like that. So you can see that the media, it's not just Australian media, Murdoch and back in his empire, you know what I mean? Murdoch and the empire have, pre-calculated this ahead because now it's become the most central issue, even though it was said it's not going to be talked about.
Okay, I'd be really interested to do a study and find out what the links are between Murdoch and Goldman Sachs, Murdoch and JP Morgan. Just find out who's controlling who, and I think it would be interesting, because you might find that Murdoch stands to make money. No, I don't know, but there's a possibility that could be on the go as well.
Yeah, there's a large possibility.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we could get into those interpersonal links between the organizations or whatever, and that would be juicy stuff. But really, we don't have to go that far. The links that are involved here, the power structures, whatever, it is so obvious what they're doing. Yeah. Again, I'm kind of didn't see this coming. I did kind of forewarn that Abbott was going to be snookered with his anti-climate change position. But for News Corp to so blatantly come out and say, well, Abbott, the ball's in your court now, mate. We helped get you elected by helping you champion anti-climate change action. But now climate change action is a thing that has to be done. And if Abbott doesn't toe the line, and now, because it's so easy for Abbott now, right? He can just say, well, when Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard instituted their carbon taxes, there wasn't a global consensus on it. Now, clearly there's a global consensus, so we're going to enact climate change action. It's easy for Abbott to do that now, but if he doesn't want to play along with that, which he will, by the way, because he's a Rhodes scholar, and in future episodes we'll go into the details about Rhodes and Cecil Rhodes and the entire British establishment and how it all works. But the point is, Abbott probably will go along with this, but if he doesn't, you better believe there's waiting to knock him off and take over the leadership of the Liberal Party. And sure enough, Australia will be on the climate change action bandwagon. Now, we've just discussed the political consequences, the media and the political consequences of this climate change thing for G20. What we haven't discussed is our personal views about climate change, global warming, etc. I'm going to throw to you two before I give my opinion. I'll start with you, Lindsay. Climate change, global warming, just generally speaking, putting aside G20 and Abbott, generally speaking, what are your views?
I remember there was a mark put on the beach or on a rock near a beach in Tasmania back in the 1700s or whenever they had a colony down there. And apparently, the last I heard, maybe 5 years ago, the sea level hadn't changed from the mark that was on the rock, right? So this, like over the last few days, I've heard these people, crying about, the ocean's going to envelop all the Pacific Islands and what have you. And I thought, no, unless there's been a change in the way the shapes that the oceans are shaped around the Earth, no, it hasn't moved from Tasmania. It's not going to move into the Pacific Islands. This thing is the whole bullshit thing. That's my view of it. Now, the other thing is there may well be global warming. I don't know, but the possibilities of it being carbon, I think, are quite remote.
Yeah.
It's probably the sun doing what it does every 11 years, every 100 years, whatever, And I think we were talking about this the other night with Obama's speech out at the university. There was no connect. It was, we've got global warming and this is the answer. There was no thing saying, well, is there a tie-in between carbon dioxide and global warming? There was no mention of that at all. It was assumed that this was all part of the same thing. And I'm very dubious about that whole connection. That's the first thing. I'm trying to think how to put it. I really don't like the idea of trading on anything. Even if they thought it was going to help, I can't see how this is going to cut back on carbon dioxide. Even if we could prove that carbon dioxide was a problem, I can't see how this is going to cut back on it. Because we've talked about this before, about down at Botany Bay when the oil companies were dumping chemicals into the bay. All that were under government. It didn't stop any more rubbish going into the environment. And I think it'll be the same with this. Anyway, I won't go any further with that, but yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah. Mine is sort of in parts as well, and it is similar to what you say now. The first part is, let's assume that these reports actually can be made, and that these reports that have been released are legitimate, that the Earth is warming, which these reports seem to suggest that it is. I believe, and it has been completely exposed, that carbon's not the responsibility for it. That's complete bullshit, and that it's not a man-made thing. It's not man-made. If these reports are real, that the Earth is warming and that the environment is changing, that the entire climate is developing, that's not a man-made thing. That's due to the Earth and due to the sun and whatnot. Now, there's the second part where there's been reports released saying how impractical and impossible it is to even measure that, because they're not taking into account the sea, various parts of the sea levels. They're not taking into all of these things. I can't get into detail, and it was the last time since I refreshed my memory on it. Concluded that these reports to measure this were completely impractical and impossible, and that all throughout history you've seen the same patterns of the Earth happen. That it's just a periodic cycle of the Earth, that if it is warming up. So man-made climate change and global, the fact that the climate could be changing, I don't think is impractical in any sense. And anyone that's actually looked into it, and when you actually look at the scientific reports that do support climate change, you can see that they're all controlled, because you look at who funds them. You look at the companies that fund them, the organizations that fund them, that are made to spew out this garbage, where great groups like the Galileo movement in Australia and all of these other anti-climate change establishments have released evidence to suggest either A, if the reports are real, that the Earth is actually heating up and the climate's changing, that it's not man-made, and B, that these reports in the first place are completely impossible to make. So there's certainly not, and when any time the media or political establishment pushes it, it's complete bullshit.
Can I just jump in for a minute?
Please do.
I have a file on my computer that I got maybe a year ago, and it was about statistics from nearly 100 years ago in Australia. And what struck me was they were having special trains to transport people from Sydney up into the Blue Mountains, so they'd be in a cooler climate, because people were dying from the heat and things like that. So it's not like this is hot. And I can remember 20 years ago working out west of Moree in central New South Wales, and you'd have 2 months where you hardly had a day under 40 degrees. It's not special.
And what's amusing about that is that the mainstream media coverage of the G20 and Abbott's opposition to having climate change on the agenda was, isn't it ironic that we're having a heat wave in Brisbane when Abbott doesn't want climate change on the agenda, implying that this heat wave is due to climate change. And what they said was that today was the hottest day in Brisbane since 1960 something, that it was the hottest overnight temperature in Toowoomba since 1960 something else, yada, yada. Like, isn't this ironic? But then the critical thinking person just has to think to themselves, well, hold on a second. Does that mean that climate change was a problem back in the 1960s?
Yeah.
Like, and then of course the kids are trained to say, oh, but that was just temperature variation back in the 60s. That's different to climate change now. You know, the climate overall is getting warmer, but the whole hockey stick that was based on has been completely disproved. It's complete bunkum.
Yeah.
If the temperatures are so hot today, let's for the moment just accept that they're hot. If you're saying that records are being broken from the 1960s, think through this for a moment. Just think through this for a moment. If this is a heat wave that's so problematic, but the records, like, if people can't think through that little anomaly on their own, nothing that you or anyone in this room says will change their mind.
Yeah.
The only thing that could change their mind would be someone like Obama. That's the only thing. And of course, as we've discussed, Obama has a reason to talk his book. Now, both of you guys gave your reasons for what your beliefs are, but you didn't really summarize what your belief is. Let me put it to you more directly. Lindsay, if someone comes up to you and says, anthropogenic global warming, we have to tax people to fight it, what's your response?
Oh, I've read some United Nations studies from maybe 10, 15 years ago, and they were saying that we're going to have to bring in a universal environmental tax. And you just think, oh, righto, well, this has got to be it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I've been waiting for it for 10 or 15 years. And then suddenly you think, well, yeah, well, it is a universal tax. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
No, I'd tell them complete bullshit. You're wrong. The reports have been falsified. They've been disproven. You know, there is some evidence to suggest that the Earth could be warming in certain reports that I do find a little bit credible, but as again, it's not man-made. All of this whole bogus thing, it's complete rubbish. That would be my response to that question.
They put that question to me and I ask myself, is this person under the age of 25 and were they educated in Australia? And if the answers to those questions are yes and yes, maybe you're right and I move on. There's no discussion to be had. When we talk about indoctrination or brainwashing, whatever, these terms are so strong that people sometimes are automatically repelled by them. But think through what this is. If you are raised from a young age to think that you as a little human are hurting the environment, and all of your friends are hurting the environment, and all of your parents and friends and family, you're all hurting the environment, and the only one who can solve that is the government, that is indoctrination, blatantly. And if you read works like Animal or Orwell, he, you know, in that story, what do the pigs at the top do? They take away the young to raise them the way that they want to raise them. For the same reason that certain German leaders are quoted as saying, well, I don't care what you people think. It's the youth that matter, because soon enough, you'll be dead. So 15 years ago, if people were saying, we're going to tax you for being, essentially for being a human, for being a living, breathing organism, that's what we're going to do. And now that's ridiculous. But you only have to go through 15 years, and that's an entire cohort of kids. You know, an entire cohort of voters are dead. Another cohort are vegetables in their living rooms watching TV, watching Obama. And then you've got a whole bunch of young voters, 18 through 25 or whatever, who are completely on board with this because they don't know any different. If that's not brainwashing and indoctrination, I don't know what is. But look at this logically, and this is the way I've seen it for a little while. And again, remember, I bought into that when I was younger, okay? I wasn't raised to be a climate change denier. And as soon as they start deriding you as a denier on any topic, you have to wonder what the agenda is. But my questions that I started asking, you know, not too long after I got elected, and I started trying to think for myself, which all people should do, is I thought to myself, well, even if we assume that humans are responsible for climate change, and even if we assume that it's carbon that's responsible, let's just take these two assumptions. How does placing a tax on it change anything? You either have to change people's lifestyles, and who's going to give up their car? Who's going to give up their meat? Some people will, but most won't. Who's going to give up their travel? You know, some of the people who are climate change action are people who travel a lot, you know, the people who buy new clothes regularly, the people who have huge carbon footprints of their own. You compare that to someone like myself. I'm fortunate. I can ride my bike to work. I can ride my bike to the shops. I don't own a car. I'm fortunate in that I don't care if my clothes are new. I'm wearing clothes today that I bought 3 years ago. You know what I mean? So my carbon footprint is actually smaller than the people who are arguing that we should tax people. I mean, the hypocrisy there should tell you enough. if you believe that that carbon taxes will change people's behavior, at least your argument is somewhat cogent. You're saying, well, carbon taxes will make people lead lesser lifestyles. Just be honest about it. You want people to regress in their lifestyles, which if everyone agreed to do, I would actually be happy to do.
Yeah.
I don't have a very extravagant lifestyle. The problem is that these people aren't going to give up their own lifestyles. And a billion or more people who are trying to move into this lifestyle, and you think that somehow putting a tax on those of us who already have this lifestyle is going to make a difference, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at it from a practical perspective, even if AGW is true, even if it is, how does carbon taxes make a difference? They don't. It's absurd. Somebody will benefit though, and that's the people who deal in the trading of the carbon permits, and that's why they're in the game. They'll say they're in it to fix the environment or fix whatever. No, they're doing what they're always going to do, and that is try and make money off the sucker peasants.
Yeah.
For me, it's as simple as that.
Okay, and I'll just bring up, they never ever do one thing. Part of what they also did was that they'll have destroyed, but that was one of the things in the Sustainable Development report, was that we've got to get rid of golf courses, we've got to get rid of air conditioners, and it went on, and then it blamed Christianity, which means all the Anglo-Saxon countries, and Islam, which means all the Muslim countries. They were the great, well, the devil that was causing this damage to the earth in this report. So you've got that double whammy. They're trying to destroy us because we're a threat to what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. I think Johnno summed it up perfectly.
Let me put it to you like this, okay? Many people will mock Catholicism, and it's funny to us how in the past, before the Protestant Reformation or whatever, basically people were told you were born with original sin. The only way for you to overcome that is to pay the church money, right? To repent and to pay money. And we think that's funny. Isn't it funny how it's sick, but it's funny how they were able to convince people that they were born just by virtue of being alive, they were sinful, but they could fix that by giving money to a centralized government. That's what most people is amusing, right? Well, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing, except in the past it was a sin, against God or against nature. Now it's a sin against Gaia or against nature, but it's the exact same thing. And I've brought up this parallel to people before, and I'll try and lead the conversation by funny that the Catholic Church used to, and to an extent still does that. Yeah, of course that's funny. Ha ha ha. Isn't it so easy to brainwash people? Yeah, okay. Now let's look at what they're doing today. Oh, nah. It's cognitive dissonance 101. They get the glossed over eyes. And that's why I said to you, if someone says to me, Johnno, AGW, carbon taxes, whatever, there's no point discussing this with people.
Yeah.
People will either deprogram themselves from the brainwashing like I have done, or they will not. And in most cases, I think they will not. They will go along like happy little stupid serfs. They'll pay their tax. Oh, aren't I doing a good thing for the environment? Supporting a carbon tax. They'll go on and eat their food that travels a long distance. They'll buy their new clothes. They'll go on their travel. It's really the same thing as the form of repentance. Pay a little money for being sinful because you know you're being sinful, and then go on with your life. Yeah. I'll pay the government to fix my sins. I mean, it's a sick thing. It's an amusing thing. Normally I'd be laughing more, but I'm just drained from the weekend. But it is an hysterically amusing thing for me most of the time that people actually believe this makes sense.
And the other thing you bring up is it's another religion.
It is.
It's a religion. And
we're heretics, Lindsay. By saying to people, no, I don't agree with what you've been taught, you are heretical. And people aren't taught climate change action, whatever, but people can hold different views. No, you're told this is the truth. You have to do something because you're already bad. And anyone who disagrees, well, they're going against science. Yeah. They're going against science. But how many of these people know anything about science? A scientific hypothesis is one that is falsifiable. Now, the so-called climate change models that they're saying, well, based on these models, this amount of carbon emission will lead to permafrost, blah, blah, blah. Not a single one of those models, and they've been doing these models now for well over a decade, has actually predicted the next year or 5 years or whatever. They're wrong every time. Yeah. So insofar as these models are falsifiable, to the extent that they are, because in many ways they're not, but to the extent that they actually are false. Yeah. And you're trying to tell me that this is science? It's ridiculous. And then people will say to you, oh, but what are you saying, that scientists are liars? Are you saying that scientists wouldn't tell the truth or whatever? Well, think about it. If you're getting your funding, if you're there are climate change scientists. That is their role now. What are they going to come out and do? They're going to research how it's not true. Where's the money in that? Where's the money in that? There's no money in that. And look, I don't blame a guy. If you've done a 3-year science degree, you've probably racked up 50 grand in debt. God knows how much debt people are going to be racking up in the future. And the only job that you can get is researching for something that essentially already has a set agenda, like climate change science. I don't blame a person for writing the report, using these findings and these findings to come to this. I don't blame them for doing that. That's natural human behavior. You pay the average person enough money, they'll say or do anything. And if all the money in climate change research is to find that climate change is real and a threat, of course that's going to be the outcome. I mean, this is so obvious. If someone can't see it, there's no point debating it, which is why I'm elaborating for 5 minutes like I am now, because I normally shut my mouth, but I'm with a good audience now. Most of our listeners are people who may or may not agree with us, but will at least listen to this other side.
Yeah. Well, can I just bring, I don't want to labour this forever, but if you go back to the hole in the ozone layer, as soon as the my brain's gone blank.
CFCs?
Yeah, the CFCs had a patent renewal, it suddenly disappeared. And I don't know whether, and I remember seeing a document that came out where the people holding the patent were saying, well, we can't really prove that this is causing a hole, but we will go along with it anyway. Well, lo and behold, they got their patents and bang, all right, it's all over with now. So to me, it's the same. After a little while, you get tricked a few times, you think, oh,
yeah, I wish that were true, that for the average person, they get tricked once or twice. And then like for me, it was weapons of mass destruction, right? I was a relatively young kid when weapons of mass destruction were going to kill everyone. I believed it. I wanted them to take out Saddam. When I found out that that was not just a lie, but a massive, elaborate lie, I thought, well, I'm not going to trust the mainstream media again. And then so from that point, I mean, okay, I kind of believed them about climate change. Let me rephrase that. I'll be more skeptical in the future. I mean, it's a process of going from believing to becoming skeptical. For me, that was just an obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
But for many people, no, you can lie to them about Naira. You can lie to them about weapons of mass destruction, hit them with ISIS and they believe it. You know what I mean? Some people just never learn. They never learn. Look, guys, this has been a good discussion on climate change. We didn't really plan to discuss it like this, but I'm happy with how it's all rolled. Do you guys have any final thoughts on climate change before we move on?
No. I'm right now.
All right, another thing I wanted to discuss, and it kind of ties into the climate change one world government agenda, is the communique. I mispronounced it last night. I said communique, but it's actually communique that the G20 release at the conclusion of their talks with the basic bullet points of what they all agreed to behind closed doors. I haven't had time to go through the entire communique or to go through their action plan and all the other documents they've released. But when I did get home before the show, I did have just a little bit of time to have a look. And item number 9 came to my attention, and I want to share it with you guys right now. I'll quote from, this is from the G20 communique. Quote, this is item number 9. Our actions to increase investment, trade and competition will deliver quality jobs, but we must do more to address unemployment, raise participation and create quality jobs. We agreed to the goal of reducing the gap in participation rates between men and women in our countries by 25% by 2025, taking into account national circumstances, to bring more than 100 million women into the labour force, significantly increase global growth and reduce poverty and inequality, end quote. Now, some of that sounds very nice, right? But think about what they're saying. Remember, this is the G20. The majority of the nations are either advanced or advanced developing nations. They're saying we want to get more women into the workforce, and they just accept it as a prima facie good that they would do that. The obvious problem is, well, hold on, many of these women aren't in the workforce. They're probably raising families, which is an incredibly important job in any society, especially in our societies, which are quickly degrading before our very eyes. And what they're saying is we're all agreeing to do what we can to get more of those women into work, and just not even, they don't even suggest that maybe that might not, but that just must be a good thing.
Yeah.
And you can see who benefits from that. Yeah. The very same people who, it wasn't so long ago that in a family, you could have one income that was enough earns enough money to pay for a house, and not over 30-year mortgages in a much shorter time than that. Pay for a car, pay for electronics as electronics became a big thing, put people through school, buy food. There were no dramas. All of a sudden, you get all of the extra people into the workforce, predominantly women. Now you've got 2 incomes, and yet despite that, 50 years later and all the advances in technology, now 2 incomes are needed to service a mortgage, to pay for the car or the second car. The second car needed to get to work, to put the kids through school and what have you. I mean, the same people who benefited from that little scam, they're just trying to milk it for even more. I mean, to me, it's so obvious what's going on here. What do you think, Ethan?
I think that's interesting. That was a good find that you did. It's just the entire plan was just like this. It was going into a broader picture, the destruction of the family unit over time, the destruction of everything, turn everyone against each other, create circumstances where, through movies, through everything, painting a picture that this is a regular thing, that, that doing it tough, that struggling, that cheating, that, having multiple sexual partners, this is all normal, you know what I mean? To paint this as the destruction of the family unit where, the divorce rates have gone through the roof over the last 50 or so years, absolutely through the roof. Back in the day, when I spoke to my pop about this, he told me when I was younger, he said, back then, thinking the very thought of divorce, was sort of a, jaded subject. You didn't want to think about it because that's just not what happens. Now this is just a small part, but that was the overall plan because that is what benefits the agenda that's behind it.
Yeah. No. Well, I've thought through this stuff for a long time. It's almost to me, if you go back into the biblical stuff where they were taken away and to another country and whatever, and they became slaves and they worked for nothing, or you stayed in your own country and you were a vassal and you had to pay taxes every year, and that's how I view it. Most of our taxes don't go to running the government; they go to the IMF. So we are vassal states. That's the way it is, and the idea of having it's not enough to have one lot of slaves. You really should have the whole family working. We'll tax you, and so you'll pay tribute to the IMF from both partners, and it just goes on. Anyway, it goes on and on. But it's not. I can see that. Once again, we come back. They're killing 2 or 3 birds with the one stone. They're getting all our money. They're keeping us down. They're taking all the cream off the top. I don't know whether I've spoken here. I was speaking to somebody the other day about it. I can remember where coal miners would be working in underground with picks and shovels, and they were still making a living. They could go home and buy steak to eat. Now you've got these big machines that will pick up huge numbers of tons in one go, and yet there's no more money being made off that. It's the same out west with the wheat. I've spoken to a bloke who, in his lifetime, this is just recently, he's still alive. They used to bag wheat, sew it up, put it on the back of a 4-ton truck, take it into town, carry it up to the top of the wheat silo, and pour it in. Now you don't see anything under a B double, and they've got harvesters that harvest 70 tonne an hour. Now, where's the cream from that going? It's not coming to us. Where's it going? Somebody's just milking the top off us. So that's what I'm trying to get at. So they're breaking up the family.
Yep.
They're taking more tax off us. They're taking all the profit that we should be getting as members of this country. And I think it's going to get worse because they know damn well that while the mothers are not at home looking after the kids and teaching them, this business about the hand that rocked the cradle rules the world, while they're not doing that, the kids are going to become delinquent. You'll be able to find them. And, well, even the Aboriginals today were whinging about how many kids are in custody. They're not being controlled. It's going to go right through the whole, once this generation goes up. I know even now the teachers complain bitterly. The kids that go to school still haven't been potty trained at 5 or 6 or whatever, So that it's just they're trying to destroy our nation, turn us all into degenerates in one way or another, mental degenerates or whatever. So they're winning all round.
Yeah, you've made this point before that these people are very clever and they do try and kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. And I guess if you could summarize, what are the birds they're killing here? Well, 1, they're getting more people into the workforce, which is more tax.
Yep.
Okay, straight up. 2, they're helping further break down the family unit because strong families are a lot harder to govern and to control. Yep. So you get the woman into the workforce. It takes a superhuman man or woman to be able to work a job and keep a house good. It can be done. That is true. But it's so much harder. Yep. And even if you can do that, that means you've got no time for yourself. And if you're working and trying to be a good house mum or a good house dad, and you don't leave time for yourself, you just make it more likely that you're going to run into your own problems. So that's still breaking down the family, isn't it? Yeah. So A, you're getting more taxation. B, you're helping get the person out of the house, which means that the kids now are raised by school and by the education system and by the mainstream media. Of course, we know the influences of the education and the mainstream media and who controls those. So you can see this straight off the bat. There's 3 things that they're achieving by doing this. Yeah. And they say blatantly, this point number 9 of the communique after Brisbane G20, as if we haven't gone far enough in destroying the family unit and getting more people into work and what have you. We're No, we want to go further. We want to lessen the gender gap in the labour force by another 25% by 2025. And remember, 2025 is only 11 years away. I mean, it seems like so far away, but that's just another decade.
Yeah.
I mean, when I read that part, I thought this deserves its own show, you know. And of course, we don't have our we came in tonight with very few notes because we've been out all weekend. Usually, we try and be a lot more fluid in what we say, but I think we're all on the same page here.
Yeah.
It is at worst, it's debatable whether this is a good thing. To me, it's clearly a bad thing. But surely anyone can see, well, hold on, we should be debating whether this is a good thing. Whereas they've just come out and said, we agree to the goal of reducing the gap in participation rates between men and women in our countries by 25% by 2025. That's it. And there'll be people out there, maybe not our listeners, most of our listeners are pretty switched on, but there'll be people out there listening to this saying, well, hold on, are you saying women shouldn't be in the workforce? Are you saying women can't work? Actually, I'm saying the opposite. The role of being a good house mum and a good wife is an incredibly important job, far more important than any amount of money that she's going to earn going out there to work. And that's where this whole second wave feminism that took root in the specifically in the 1960s was so destructive. Essentially what they did was they flipped things on its head and said, if you're not being valued in terms of dollar terms, you're not being valued, which is utterly ridiculous. So now, I mean, the People's Summit that we had prior to the G20, there was one topic that was on women and the workforce, or women, something of that nature. I don't have the program in front of me. And sure enough, even the so-called feminists in the room, their main arguments were about how women weren't being paid enough money in dollar terms. I mean, money is a make-believe creation, like literally now. It's not even backed by gold. But they're actually valuing their worth to society and the worth of their sisters in society in dollars. Yeah. Do you see how sick this is?
Yeah.
They've completely lost conception of the fact that a good mum to her children is doing invaluable work. Many smart people will argue that while men can be good teachers of children and can be good teachers of young men, that nurturing period when a kid is young, the best person to learn how to be a good little human, I would argue, is generally done by women.
Yeah.
And the fact that I even hold that view now, again, makes me a heretic, because I was raised in post-second wave feminism Australia, and that's the effect that it's had. And when you look at people like Gloria Steinem, one of the leaders of the second wave feminist movement, and how she was arguing, women, if you're at home, you're not being valued, your man's keeping you, you're a slave, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the mainstream media ran with all of this because it's all part of the same agenda. If you look at people like Gloria Steinem and their backgrounds, who funded them and other things that they have in common, it's very obvious what they were doing.
Yeah. What was her name again?
Gloria Steinem. Oh. And look, I've been wanting to do a show on this particular thing for a long time. And as I always say, there's just so much to cover. Because tonight we're doing more of an off-the-cuff discussion, we're getting into things in our pre-show discussion. We always do some pre-show discussion about what we're going to talk about. We didn't say that we'd get this far into it, but once I got started, I just kept going. And I apologize for so much talk off the cuff, but I can assure you, if anything that I say sounds like a little bit out there or whatever, within a week or two, I'll come back with the notes, with the names, with the connections, who was behind and what they did, when they did it. It is, when you look at it, it's so obvious. They've destroyed the family. They've got more people into the workforce. And that's not enough for these vampires. Now they're saying, right, now communicate, we're going to go even further. And we're not even going to let you imagine that might not be a good thing. It must be a good thing. And for arguing otherwise, you're a heretic.
Well, it follows on from last night. Remember Obama at the university was talking to the kids? We discussed that last night. Yep. You know, don't listen to those old people. They've all got a vested interest. Yeah. That's exactly the same thing you're talking about.
Yep, absolutely. We've been on this issue for a little while. Ethan, do you have any final thoughts you want to add to this?
No, I've researched a lot of second wave feminism, so I look forward to going more in depth when we actually do an episode about it and go more in depth about the destruction of the family unit, not just through that, but through the youth as well. That's a major part of it because, as you said, Animal Farm, take them and raise them the way through media, through music, through all of this. Yeah. And because there's no family unit there to instill values and to raise children in a certain way, into a way they're being raised by the establishment, and that's a difficult thing. Yeah. So I look forward to expanding on that. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've gone through the climate change thing. We've gone through the communique talking about women. Now I want to move on to the flag burning incidents. So we discussed in last night's episode how much of the so-called protest movement in G20 here, Brisbane, was led by one particular Indigenous group, and they, as we said, the Indigenous of this country have every right to feel aggrieved, every right. What we disagreed with was their strategy for protest and the fact that they were taking up such a large part of a protest for G20 when there are so many other things that also deserve to be discussed. Today, things were escalated a little bit in that, again, the same group were leading the protests at the main hub of the protest against G20, and some flags were burnt. Now, Lindsay, you were there. Before I read out this little bit that I've got from Sky News, do you want to just recap what you saw while you were at that event earlier today?
Yeah, it was very similar rantings, but they weren't quite as extreme as yesterday, I didn't think, in the lead up. And then the next thing I know, they're handing out flags and people are walking around the microphone in big flags. And I thought, oh, well, I wasn't quite sure what, after what had been said, why were they using the flags, you know? And then it dawned on me, all right. And then they started building a fire. And then they went through this procedure of putting the Australian flags on the fire. Now, part of me sort of reacted quite badly to this because it's my flag. I'm an Anglo-Saxon with the, you know, all the crosses in the corner and all that sort of stuff. But you've got to be emotional about these things and try and look at it logically. But I can imagine if it affected me like that momentarily, then this would be I'm trying to think what the word for it is. Almost like a needle to huge numbers of people that I know in the outer community. This is almost like treason or something like that. Yeah, and of course these people say it's not treason. We are a separate nation, etc., etc. So I can see it from both point of view. But nevertheless, I'm sure that a lot of people will react very badly to this.
And I was in the city, out in the field again, just walking around the city trying to get different coverage of different things. And I got a text message from my mate Ethan, who was at home editing his work for TOTT News. And again, if you want genuine coverage of the G20 articles and videos, go to TOTT News because you'll get far better coverage than the mainstream media. Ethan was at home doing his editing for his website. And I got a text message while I was in the city with my handy cam, and it's Ethan saying, "Did you hear that they burnt the flags?" Straight away, this was being reported by the mainstream press. Ethan, when you first heard about the flag burning, what was your response?
I was pretty pissed off, actually. I was pretty, I didn't know what to think because in a lot of respects, we did hold back last night in terms of our real feelings on the day. I know that I was incredibly distressed at the time that this speech had been taken over, that this whole day, that it was a G20 march, that these evil people were in my city and only select issues were being spoken about. So when I saw that again today, you know what I mean, after we took a democratic approach about it, we took a democratic approach, analysed it properly for them to then go out again. And it wasn't just the flag burning. Johnno, you came home and you showed me some of the speeches that were beforehand and some of the rhetoric that was being said in the speeches beforehand. And it gets to a point where you're saying, come on, you know, what is this? So the mainstream media reported on it immediately. And that's how I found out about it, because I was at home and I knew that Johnno would be interested in it. And he was there and he said that he did film it. And I just, you know, I was just completely against it because that's the very same thing that they want us to be divided amongst each other. We are humanity. We're one humanity. I understand. I've said, you know, I've spoken to elders. Elders know me. You know what I mean? I've been there for rallies. They do have their own issues, but we are humanity, and dividing amongst ourselves is exactly what they want.
Yeah, and I've got a few points to make on this one. Firstly, I do have footage, and I'll get to that later on about some of the information that I have and that I'll be expanding upon in the future. Touch on what you said, Ethan. Last night we discussed how at the rally yesterday, the speeches that were being made, and this is when there was a sizable audience. There was a couple of hundred people there that grew as these speeches were being made. One after another Indigenous person yesterday basically blamed the white man, not the settlers from 200 years ago, but the white man today for all of the problems facing the Indigenous community. And it was very divisive. And the point that we made was whether or not these people have a right to be aggrieved. We are all the peasants here, and the top 0.0 whatever % are in buildings a kilometre away. We need to be united, and their speeches were doing their best to divide us. But as you said, we were very diplomatic about it. And last night we didn't try and make these Indigenous leaders or the speakers out to be the enemy, because they're not. Like, we can see that we're on the same side here. We just pointed out that their speeches did the exact opposite and divided us. Then today, to turn around and burn that is being done intentionally to be divisive. This isn't just, oh, your speeches will be divisive. When you decide to burn the flag, you're doing that to be controversial. You're doing that to be divisive. So after last night, we criticized that group for what turned out to be divisive work. Well, today, it wasn't even that what they did was divisive. It was that it was intentionally divisive. Now, my own views on burning the flag, I don't give a stuff. And if we didn't have the attitude we try to avoid the swear words on this show, if we didn't have this general policy on the Australian Roundtable of trying to be family friendly, I would paraphrase Bill Hicks and what he had to say about burning the flags. I don't care. It's not the fact that flags were burnt. It's that they are doing it to divide at a time when it's so important that we're united. It's G20. The very top, or at least their proxy representatives, are here discussing how they're going to further divide us, like with and what are we doing? The people who are leading our protests are further divided. I mean, it's just, what can you say about that?
Well, if you go back to that Monty Python movie where they said about him, no, he's just a naughty little boy. And that's how I felt about that today. They were just trying to be naughty little boys.
Yep.
And no, really. They thought they were, this is us against them and all that. But no, you're just being a naughty little boy.
Yep.
And that's how I think we have to treat it.
And then you have to, I'm wondering to myself, when did they purchase the flag? I mean, when were they first planning to do this? Obviously, they led the protests on the Monday. They completely controlled the protests yesterday. How far in the planning did this happen? Now, of course, their official story is that they did this because Abbott said that before the British settlers came, it was just bushland here or whatever. You can debate whether or not Abbott's comments were valid or not. They said that today's action was in response to Abbott's comments. But are we to believe that they just went and bought those flags immediately? Or is it possible that this was planned in advance and that their coup de grace of leading the protest on the Sunday, the final day, was to be as divisive as they could? Like, that was their final message. Getting the G20 side out yesterday wasn't enough. Today we're going to go one step further and give the media a whole week now. Like, the media cycle begins tomorrow to spend time further dividing us. And of course, look, our listeners don't know Lindsay and Ethan as well as I know them. I know very well that neither of you are racist in any way. And none of this is about racism. It's about us peasants letting ourselves be divided on race lines. But guess what? There are racist Australians out there, just like in any country, okay? And many of them will now be whipped up into a racist frenzy that'll help further divide us. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we're not just thinking about today, we're thinking longer term. The peasantry have been completely divided, and it is people who are part of this peasantry leading the divide.
Yeah. And that was one of the things they mentioned today as they were trying to close up the sins. Today is not the end of it. This is where it begins. So they've got plans to go on burning flags or whatever, the similar sort of thing into the future. So there's more division to come.
Yeah.
That's their intention.
And good on them doing that in their own time. This is G20. You know what I mean?
Sorry.
You know what I mean? If they want to, you know what I mean? If they think that's the best way to push their issues, which they obviously do exist, good on you. Go do it when it's not G20 where we need to be united. We came together. There was, journalists, there was groups that I don't associate with all, quite frankly, can't stand most of them on most days. And they can't stand me. We came together for this G20 Summit. We said this is the time to come together. And the people that weren't doing that were this. I keep reiterating, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You do have your issues. They are recognized there, but you went completely wrong about it during G20 because
I wasn't laughing at you. When you started, it just reminded me of yesterday.
Look, it is important to have a laugh. A lot of our listeners have come across from Max Resistance, and we'll do it live, and they do try and have a focus on laughing, because your two choices when you know what's going on and what's happening to us as a society is to laugh or to cry. And normally in our episodes, if you're a first-time listener to the Australian Roundtable tonight or this week, I can assure you normally we're much more jovial than this. Hopefully with the information that we've been discussing today and yesterday and the day before, people can see why perhaps today we're not being as jocular as usual. Essentially, the G20 has come to town and the divisions in our society haven't just been shown up for what they are. The co-option of the resistance hasn't just been shown up for what it is. But if that's all not enough, today it gets even worse. And hopefully people can forgive us if we're not as jocular as normal. So, Lindsay, chuck in a few laughs. We have to try and be as positive as we can. Think about it this way. And again, I don't care if people burn flags. I wouldn't care if the Ukrainians burn Vladimir Putin's flag or vice versa. I mean, I don't care if you burn the Australian flag. Here's the issue. What do you think would have happened? In fact, what would happen tomorrow if you or I decided to burn the Indigenous flag?
Exactly. I was thinking that today. I thought in another country, those coppers would have come down and just cleaned them out. because it was treason or whatever. Yeah. I mean,
So before you go on, Lindsay,
Yeah.
I think anyone burning a flag, I mean, if it's a danger to a building or whatever, like in the practical sense, sure. But on principle, burning a flag, I think it's completely unimportant. It doesn't matter. I'm glad the police didn't come and stop them.
Yeah.
The point that I'm making is, if you or I decided to go to the corner of King Street or whatever it was where they did that today, if you and I decided to do that and burn the Indigenous flag, what would happen to us? Serious question.
Oh no, you get into a blue. You get into a real fight. Yeah.
People would come and physically accost us.
Yeah.
But even if they didn't, I mean, I haven't checked Australia's 18C laws, whatever it is at the moment, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we would risk being imprisoned. I mean, I'm going to double check that before the next episode, but I'm pretty sure that by inciting violence or hatred of a group or whatever, that you and I could be imprisoned. And instead of, and I'm not saying I want people in prison, I'm just saying if you're going to have laws, I mean, what's a law if it's only applied to one group of people and not to another? Well, it's not a law. It's something very different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so if any of us were to burn an Indigenous flag and run the risk of being imprisoned, for us to be sitting there on a day when we're meant to be united and one group gets away with burning someone else's flag and the police, where there's hundreds of them around, do nothing, what does it say?
Yeah. But I think you've got to look at it from their point of view. They're saying, we are not part of this country. We are a separate nation. You just haven't recognised us. And you're occupying our land. That's their attitude.
Oh, I fully get that.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is, look, if we could go and burn the Indigenous flag, which I actually think their flag is cooler than the Australian flag. No offence, Lindsay, but red and the yellow in the middle is a really cool looking flag, personally. I have no interest in burning it. What I'm saying is, if they're happy to burn the Australian flag on a day when Australians are meant to be coming together, or at least some Australians are meant to be coming together, I wouldn't have so much issue if I were to believe that if I were to do the same thing the other way around, they'd be cool with it. I respect you guys doing that. That's your right. Burn a flag, who cares? But I know for a fact that wouldn't happen.
No.
It'd be the complete opposite. And that's what I'm saying. It's the hypocrisy that gets me.
Yeah. And taking advantage. What I was trying to get at, if you did that in China, say for instance, you're up on the hill above India, Nepal or somewhere like that, and you burnt the Chinese flag, I'm quite sure they wouldn't hold back at all. And it doesn't matter. They have the same logic. This is our land. You don't have a right to be here. That wouldn't matter. You'd get cleaned up. So you've got the two things. And in reverse, I'm sure they do the same. I'm sure that those big bulky fellas in there today would turn on you and clean you up.
Absolutely, they would. Absolutely, they would. And I mean, the show, we're getting through time far too quickly. I should move. That's the discussion of the flag thing. I did get footage yesterday. The speeches. The anti-whites, the racist anti-white speeches, one after the other. I didn't get any footage of it, Ethan. I don't know if you did. But today I decided to go along and get some footage of some of the speeches. Now, one of the people who took to the stage, I got her entire speech, and it included things like, you guys, that is us, the white people, should get back on your boats and go where you came from. I hope that to the police, who, again, didn't touch them, I hope that you guys are haunted. You are going to be haunted by our elders. We're coming for you. That was just a taste of it. And some of the remarks from the speech were this girl for PM. So when we say that these people, some of them have a genuine hatred for us, that's not exaggerating. And if you compare what she had to say today to what we said yesterday, she was positively pro-white. I mean, she was tame compared to what happened yesterday. Now, I've got full footage of that. I plan to upload it so that people can see that when we spoke yesterday about there being a visceral hatred from one group of society to another, we weren't mucking around. Of course, this young girl I found out, I got home, had just enough time to do some more research. This young girl's only 16. So I personally don't hold her responsible for her comments to want to say these things. Now, this young girl, like I said, I only found out when I got home. She's 16. She's, I think, a cute young lady. She speaks pretty well, especially in comparison to some of her contemporaries. It turns out, and I haven't had time to go and verify much of this, I will be doing so before the next episode, but from my preliminary research that I did today when I got home, it turns out that this girl might be related to one of the leaders of today's protest, who is himself, from what I understand, a professor at a university in this country. So it's not just that these people are preaching hate against the whites, it's that they're being brainwashed to hate us, and the people doing the brainwashing aren't just damn fools. They're people with positions of eminence within our academia. So what I learned today, and again, I have to go and double check all of this. I don't expect them to take my word for it just yet. But at the moment, it's looking as though it's not just that we have this hatred that's being allowed to overtake what should have been a unity struggle against the people at the top. It's that those people leading the charge of hatred are themselves closer to the top of our social,
Rung or what?
higher up on social rungs than the people sitting in this room.
Yeah. No, okay. And I brought a book over for you to read. It's the same thing. He talks about how a lot of these organisations are influenced by people with a left-wing leaning and all that sort of thing.
I mean, no one in this room went to a private school.
No.
And there's nothing wrong with going to private school. Good. If you want to send your kids to private school, good on you. From what I understand, this young girl making these vitriolic comments against the white man saying to go home, she attends a prestigious private school, with its own, Olympic-sized swimming pool or whatever. I mean, just wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we had to go to air tonight. I haven't had time to look into this, but the impression I'm getting right now is that the cancer that I saw yesterday in our society, it runs deeper than I thought. It's like the melanoma on the arm, and then you get it under the test, and you realize this thing's actually infected much worse than you think. And if this is coming through in what I'm saying, I'm far more concerned now than I was at the time listening to a group of people say how much they hate me for the fact that I have white skin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, we do need to press on because we try and keep these shows to 90 minutes. Again, I do apologize to the listeners who wanted to cheer. I know that we've got people in America who listen to us like in their morning on a Sunday. Apologies to Dolores Flores and the rest of you who are looking for a lighthearted show today. This is us just having a cathartic experience, getting this off our chest. Obviously, by next Sunday, we'll go back to our more structured format, and there'll be less of this, mourning the death of our country. On to one more topic, and that was, of course, Putin and the Putin versus the world nonsense. We didn't have too much time to go into it, but I could sit here and go through pages 7 and 8 and 9 of the Courier Mail. I am amazed at how easily people buy into this idea that Putin is being ostracized by the rest of the G20 and everything. Do you guys want to give your thoughts on what you've seen in the mainstream media and what they've tried to portray as basically a soap opera?
Yeah, it's the same old thing. The same old thing that we've seen. I don't think really. Well, for those who don't know, Putin just left the G20 earlier than expected. He, came down. He said that he was, all right with how everything went and whatnot. But I don't think he really cares. He doesn't care. He said that all the sanctions are completely useless. Putin doesn't give a crap. He doesn't care that all of this is happening. And it's, as we've said, when we've talked about in our earlier episodes, how it ties into World War III and everything, this is for an agenda. And the media are still hyping this up. And Putin is being made to be the outsider or the new global power that's arising. Tony Abbott said that he is arising as a superpower and that they will enforce more sanctions on him if he doesn't, have more transparency over the MH17 incident or push for more, democratic values. And Putin just doesn't care. He said, he was asked, what do you think of Australia? And he said, I don't think about Australia. You know what I mean? Putin's a smart man. He wasn't in the Russian intelligence network, as a spy for nothing. Yeah. He's a smart man and he knows how this is playing out. So.
Yeah. Actually, I was quite impressed on the television this afternoon when he was leaving. He went over and he shook hands and thanked the coppers on the bikes. And I thought, man, I wouldn't expect Abbott to do that.
Yeah.
And certainly wouldn't expect Obama to do that.
Yeah, well, they didn't even show up to greet him.
Yeah,
remember? They didn't have the dignity to show up to greet Putin when he arrives.
Yeah. Anyway, but getting back to this, my first impression, when I had young daughters, and when they were at school, there was all this bitching and, we got one group against the other and all this sort of, you're excluded and, and that's exactly what that sounded like to me. Oh, they're not having dinner with him. He's on his own and they've excluded him, There's a movie about it, Bad Girls or something.
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls.
All right, so page 6 and 7 of the Courier Mail. I've got it open in front of me here. Headline at the top, whatever you call the header of the page, is tensions, G20 tensions. The headline is No Mates, Putin gets a frosty welcome. There's a big photo of Putin. Table for one, Russia's Vladimir Putin seems friendless at the leaders' lunch. And Mr. Putin and Prime Minister Tony Abbott get matey with koalas. Anyway, here are the articles that are on the page. Political. These are the lead paragraphs from all of the articles on this page 6 and 7 spread. Political pariah Vladimir Putin was last night considering leaving the G20 Summit early after receiving the cold shoulder from world leaders. Next article, Ukrainian rally against tyrant. Ukrainian flags drenched in blood were waved in King George Square as 200 protesters gathered for an anti-Putin rally yesterday. Next article on page 7, Vlad pulls a U-turn as cops target protester. The Russian president's vehicle convoy performed a dramatic street maneuver yesterday to ward off potential security threats. Next article, handshake came with a slapdown for Russian leader. Russian President Vladimir Putin was issued a blunt command to get out of Ukraine the morning after arriving in Brisbane in a tense, behind closed doors exchange between leaders. And then there's an editorial on page 54 where they carry on with this nonsense. And on the page, on the photo that they've got of Putin supposedly having lunch by himself because no one wanted to be his friend, it says, they've got a thought bubble and it says, so this is what Siberia feels like, right? And this is actually the newspaper of this city, would you believe? Now, at the APEC meeting last week, Putin was the guest of honor at Xi Jinping's APEC summit, and Obama was the one on the edge of the group photos and all the rest of it. But they don't mention this, they don't mention anything. And the reason why I wanted to spend a couple minutes on this is because yesterday when I was walking through the city with my anti-TPP placards, I had one guy in particular come up to me and start asking why I wasn't criticizing Putin. And I'm like, hold on, do you know anything about the TPP? It doesn't include Russia. I mean, let me tell you why I'm against the TPP. And he listened and blah. And I don't really go and try to talk to people. But he came and spoke to me. And I explained why the TPP is such a terrible thing. I didn't like Obama lying to the kids at UQ, etc. And he said, yeah, but why are people always so critical of Obama? You know, why aren't we criticizing Putin? There are lemmings out there who actually believe this shit. And I'll give, sorry for the language, this is a family-friendly show. And I'll give you a bit more evidence. This is from yesterday's Courier Mail. They do a Vox Pop. This is where they go to a particular spot in the city and they ask people a question. They put their photo down the bottom. This is on page 75 in the news. It's called Place and Time. The question for this particular one for yesterday's paper was, if you could go for drinks with any one of the G20 leaders, who would it be and why? And this was at midnight in the Fortitude Valley, which is like the club scene of Brisbane. Let me give you a few answers. This is Chris Ryland, 38, 38, he's in IT, he lives in Fortitude Valley. Obama, he seems like a cool guy. He's open to the real world. He's not stuck in the past. Nikki Irving, 19, she's a chef from Redlands. Barack Obama, because I listened to that remix song on the radio. He sounds cool and he's the only one I know. Steve Bleismer, 33, a photographer of Nunda. I would have a beer with Vladimir Putin because he's paying, obviously. So let me repeat that. I would have a beer with Vladimir Putin because he's paying, obviously, and I'd be intrigued to hear about his warship position. Chris McAllister, 23, a banker. It would be a toss-up between Obama and Putin. Obama because he seems like an interesting kind of guy for a chat. Putin because he's crazy and a very blokey kind of bloke. You see that kind of king of the world vibe. Sarah Munson, 22, of Indooroopilly. Putin, Obama, and Abbott. I'd take all three because anything I wanted to say, I'd want an opinion from all three of them. We're trying to reach a similar goal, so I'd be interested to see if they could agree on anything. And finally, Chris Philpott, the hipster, 23, of South Brisbane. He works in insurance. Probably Obama. And I'd ask him if he's doing anything over the next couple of years with pretty much no power. Look, this is a Vox Pop. Oh, mate, we are surrounded by lemmings.
Put it in the bin.
Oh, Lindsay, mate, what do you want me to say?
No, it's not a lot. How much time have you got left?
A couple of minutes.
Can I just from last night, this is an off topic again, but just I made a mistake and I went today and spoke to Falun Gong, I think I called them last night.
Yep.
And the man today said, no. There are two things. One is Falun Gong is the philosophy.
Okay, so we'll give the background. Yesterday we mentioned how there were two groups who were leading the protests for the big protest day. One group was the Indigenous group, the other group were Falun Gong. And you had mentioned how you spoke with one of them. That's the background. And now you can go into detail about this pamphlet you've got. Yeah,
okay. And this other, I've got to find it now. That shows you how bad I am. Falun.
This counts as your final thought, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I've completely mucked it up. I should have been looking at it while you were all talking. I can't find it.
I'll tell you what, we'll jump into our final thoughts now. We'll get Ethan's and you can recompose yourself over there. Ethan, final thoughts. It's been a huge G20. Yeah, so, look, if we go a bit over 90 minutes today, that's fine because it's important that we get our final thoughts out. Your final thoughts on the day of our G20 special coverage here on the ART. What have you got to say?
I'm completely wrecked at my final thoughts. And, we don't the difference was is we were out in the heat. We were out in the heat, in the 40-degree heat. We were at the Citizen Media Centre sweating in the little tin can, little warehouse that they had there. All of these media delegates were in their air-conditioned media centre in the convention centre. You know, all of the alternative media, no matter which position they came from, did a fantastic job covering everything. And I commend everyone that was out there in the heat as I was, you know, doing the hard yards. They're probably just as wrecked as I am after this. And it was an experience that I'll always remember. The G20 will be an experience, a unique experience, but you know, I experienced pretty much every emotion during this adventure, and I look forward to, you know, continuing on for that. And I thank everyone who's checked out my OTTnews.com, because independent media in this country is really slim, real independent media coverage. So I appreciate everyone supporting it. And that's my final thoughts. That's it. The G20 is over, and we're going from this. We're going to still be full steam ahead. So, you know, it's all over now.
Okay, I found these people.
Yep.
It's Phil Duffer, DAFA, and that apparently is the exercise, like Tai Chi, and it brings spirit or whatever through the body. So that's where I went wrong yesterday. So I think basically the same thing, but they stand for two different. One's the philosophy, the other's the exercise. The only other thing I had was that I came across one of the bikies today who was holding up a placard about the Vlad laws and what have you, and I've made contact and got his email address. So with a bit of luck, I'll be getting stuff straight from the horse's mouth in the future, and we'll see where it goes. His thoughts were almost exactly mine. What happened to the $1.5 million they put into this, and shouldn't their lawyer have known the very basic thing that the High Court would fault them on, and haven't actually got anybody who's been charged under those laws, so they can't take it to the High Court because there is nobody charged. You know, so you start to wonder why all these politicians are going on saying, "Oh, it's all go now. We'll introduce the laws throughout Australia." Yep. When it hasn't really been decided upon yet.
Well, we found out the Vlad laws on Friday, and we said this to serve as a show. And I'm sure that come next week, when we get back to our regular format of having structured segments, we'll spend some time talking about the Vlad laws, and we can get into discussion with your new mate, the bikie.
Yes.
Maybe you'll rock up next week in a big leather jacket. We'll know that Lindsay's rocked up when we hear the vroom, vroom. It's been a huge weekend, Lindsay. Do you have any other final thoughts you want to leave with in this third and final G20 special?
No, I don't. No, I think I've said everything I want.
Excellent. Well, I know that I've already thanked them, but I have to put in one big, massive final thanks to Robin and to Max and all the others at the G20 People's Media Centre, whatever they called it. A fantastic resource. I didn't actually end up using it all that much myself. I spent most of my time in the field with the camera, whatever. But the fact that it was there, that they put their time in, that there was food, drink, and all the rest of it, I'll never be able to thank them enough for the work that they did in getting all of that together. I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in and putting up with us. Obviously, as the weekend's drawn on, we've been a lot less perky and cheery, but we've had lots of live listeners every episode. We thank each and everyone for tuning in. Thanks again for sharing the podcast, and every time you do that, you're not just helping us, you're helping independent media. And at this time, in this juncture in history, it's never been more important that everyone do that and get behind us. So thank you so much to all of the listeners. We'll be back to normal programming next week, 4 p.m. On the Sunday, with proper set segments and a lot less of us mumbling over our words as we try and compose ourselves. I want to thank both of you so much for the weekends. I mean, we've been looking forward to G20 and covering it for so long. You two put in even more effort than I could have ever expected or hoped. And I think between the three of us, we gave as good independent coverage as we could have hoped. So, Lindsay, especially because you have to cross to the other side of the city, which is annoying at the best of times, but even worse when you've got G20 in the way. I can't thank you enough for all your effort to get across. Thank you so much.
That's right. It was my pleasure.
And Ethan, you've done a power of work. I can't wait to spend some time reading some of your articles. I've just been too busy doing my own work, but this week I'll read some of your articles and be sharing it myself. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
Thank you. It's been great.
And that's it from me. So to all the listeners, thank you so much. We'll be back here next week, 4 p.m. Brisbane time, the Australian Roundtable podcast. We'll see you then.
Thank you.